I'm Eden Mary Gator, and this episode is brought to you by Sand Dollar Business Solutions. Now, continuing this series about the economic models that we should consider developing in the Bahamas, in this episode, we're going to take a first look, though brief, at how data is giving rise to a new economy known as the data economy. So this is an introductory look at the data economy. And the reason I say this is an introductory view is because with the data economy comes with it this unique opportunity to actually shape what a data economy could really be. Because for one, the amount of data that's being generated on a daily basis is truly mind-boggling, not to mention the rate at which all that data is being processed. It's becoming a lot faster, and the way in which all that data is collected is also advancing as well. But the truth is, even before the advancement of technology, data has always existed. We were always creating data. Data was always being generated. However, it's only recently that we've become more aware of the value of harnessing data for decision making, so much so that we're learning to manage data better with the tools that we have available, so that we're able to recognize patterns in data to find order, meaning, and value from the vast sea of data that already exists. And so the internet has actually done a really good job so far in helping us to do that. And we've extended that to the Internet of Things, or IoT as we call it, which it just means that with IoT, we've extended the digital capabilities to our everyday objects. So now with IoT, we're able to connect these objects and the things around us to the internet, allowing us to collect even more data from our environment. But more so, with the emergence of what will be known as the metaverse will allow us to harness even more data and do so on a larger scale like never before. Because for those of you who don't know, the metaverse is basically the next version of the internet. And what it does is it basically allows us to experience the internet through virtual experiences. And so the metaverse will actually bring the internet to life through virtual spaces, through virtual experiences, and even virtual worlds. And also by extension, these virtual environments and virtual capabilities will be able to extend into our real physical world as well. But it's not just virtual. It's also augmented reality, extended and blended reality. So the metaverse will actually transform how we interact in the real world environment that we're currently in. And overall, it will allow for the digital and physical worlds to come together. So the metaverse will definitely be taking the internet as we know it to a whole new level. And if you can imagine, with the metaverse, the amount of data that's about to be generated and gathered from not just points of contact, but also now from our very behaviors and physical movements and transactions as they occur in real time throughout virtual, augmented, blended, and extended reality environments. And all of that data would continue to fuel even more experiences in the metaverse and construct more personalized experiences based on our known preferences. And so the emergence of all of this goes to show that despite the data economy still being considered in its infancy, it is definitely accelerating at a super fast rate. And this brings more attention to concerns about data privacy, data protection, data rights, data ethics, data governance, even data monetization, and data sovereignty. And all of these concerns are increasingly causing many to think about the greater potential of what a data economy could be as it is shaping up. And so, as it stands right now, or rather the most fundamental way in which the data economy is viewed right now, is simply by acknowledging that data is a tradable asset and it could be used to unlock new value. Because what we see now is that data is already being exchanged and it's being managed as an asset across different platforms, across different systems, and across a whole range of different organizations. And so what's happening now is there now exists this data supply chain and an ecosystem of data value chains. And this complete network or ecosystem that exchanges data and derives value from data is what makes up what we know today as the data economy. But even though we can recognize data as this resource that can absolutely revolutionize industries, at the same time, we can also look at previous resources that were revolutionary as well, such as oil and electricity and steel. And doing so, we can recognize that the infrastructure which facilitated the processing and the exchange and the distribution of those resources was just as important as the resource itself. So in the same way, comparable to those resources of the past that sparked industrial revolutions, we can also see that the infrastructure for data that's not yet ideally established yet to facilitate the exchange and the distribution of data, that infrastructure is nonetheless what will determine the actual growth of the data economy. So here lies the greatest opportunity to determine what that infrastructure will be to bring forward a data economy that we can all participate in and that we all want to actually participate in, because the rules of the data economy are only starting to take shape. So for the Bahamas, this is the greatest opportunity to truly bring forward the next data-driven revolution, because whatever country is able to facilitate that best by putting in place the right infrastructure, the right infrastructure that allows for robust data protection, data privacy, and data sovereignty, that country will have the greatest advantage in this new reality. And guess what? Companies today are only scratching the surface of data-driven opportunities. In fact, despite data being a resource that is often stated to be the new oil, it's actually interesting because unlike oil, the value of data is not created solely by the companies that extract and process the data. So while some companies may sit on data and monetize data as if they found it in the earth, as you would oil, it's worth knowing that more than half of all company data actually becomes unused. And the reason for that is because, beyond the discovery of data, the value of data is really in the ability to extract values from it, which include insights, and often these insights need to be actionable. And actionable insights usually come with an expiration date for which they need to be acted on beforehand. So this is why more and more companies and organizations are starting to wake up to the idea that sharing data and data collaboration actually delivers higher value from data. Because when we're able to eliminate the data silos and pool data together from a wide variety of disparate sources, and with more people coming together, more people, teams coming together, bringing different perspectives and working together to analyze data, it ensures the likelihood that no valuable data becomes overlooked or gets undiscovered. Plus, When we have more people bringing together these isolated pockets of data and bringing together relevant knowledge and varying perspectives, it also makes it possible to arrive at insights with much more speed. And speed matters in today's fast-paced world when it comes to gaining real-time insights, so that we're able to address time-sensitive issues and also take advantage of valuable opportunities that have expiration dates. So the data economy requires connecting unconnected data across boundaries, and it requires collaboration to get the most value out of data, to make better use of data in ways that would never be possible to do in isolation. And so it requires collaboration, not just among companies and organizations, but also on an individual level, where we can actually start viewing each and every one of us as stakeholders in the data economy and become active participants to collaborate in the data economy. Because for one, it's quite absurd when data that's being collected from individuals and on behalf of individuals to improve how the general public is served. It's absurd how that data is not made publicly available, and not just publicly available, but openly available, meaning that you don't need permission to access the data. It should be open by default. But more so, it's absurd that the public is not included in the data collaborative process that's needed to gain the most value from the data, and the data which is relevant and useful for everyone, considering that this is data that's being collected from the public and on behalf of the public in the first place. And so there are three fundamental things that we need to consider that would definitely help to enable the kind of participation and collaboration which is absolutely required for our data economy to thrive. And the first thing is that aside from making data open and available, we also want to make data accessible. And it's important to know that there's actually a difference between data availability and data accessibility, because data is only accessible when it is understandable and when it can actually be used to empower people to affect change. So that's the difference between just making data available as opposed to making it accessible, because already we have a wealth of data that's available to us today. But what you'd find is that even though we have this wealth of data that's available to us, how many people have really and truly gained access to that? There's not many. So even though there's lots of raw data being published every single day, not many people interact with it simply because people don't know what to do with it. So to just have data openly available is not enough unless you know what to do with it. And the reason we demand open data in the first place is so that we can make use of it. The data has to inform us and enable us to make useful decisions. And so this is where data accessibility comes in. So I would argue that everyone should have the right to accessibility of public data in addition to the availability of it, because opening data is just the bare minimum for transparency and for accountability purposes. But the real work has to go into providing accessibility so that we can all interpret the data and actually close the gap from just having data available to having real access to the data. And in order to do that, we need to promote data literacy to equip people so that they can participate in the data collaborative process. But at the same time, we also have to meet people where they are. So it's important to have projects that explain data and convey the stories behind the data to demonstrate its value. It's also important to have designers and developers who can create user-friendly tools that empower people to explore data sets on their own and participate in the data collaborative process. And so basically, as a society, it's about learning how to interpret data in the open and experiencing the value in that. The second thing we need to consider is data ownership, because we need a model of ownership that recognizes the collective interest that we have in how personal data is used. And so far, people don't have a real say about their data relationships with companies and with organizations. For instance, right now there's data that's being collected about us, like our health data, for instance, including information about our DNA. Plus, there's information that's being collected from our devices, and there's data being collected from everything we do in one way or the other. And all of it is being collected by the Googles, the Facebooks, and the Apples of the world. And collectively, these companies have the data that we could in fact all use. And I mean use in a way where, as a collective, we can analyze this data and train this data to create our future systems, like our healthcare system, our future financial system, our future economic system. And overall, this is data that we can use to build our future collectively. But the thing is, when one of these companies, like Google, for instance, let's say if they choose to shut down a service, which they've done before, it's actually a reminder of how those who have the data that we can all collectively use to potentially build remarkable solutions and use to improve our public systems and infrastructure. It's a reminder of how those companies can also shut it down. And so we need to think carefully about who owns the data, because yes, these companies, they provide compelling services, and most of us do enjoy using these services. We enjoy the benefits of them. But in exchange, we're the ones providing the data which they collect to be able to do so. And so this is where the core principles of data ownership come in. And data ownership will for the most part help to shift our perception about the value of personal data. So rather than personal data being treated as a disposable object, personal data will instead emerge as an asset that generates long-term value. So, for example, if each and every one of us had a right to be given a copy of our own personal data, we wouldn't have to rely on services that could just shut down by a business decision. Because by owning our data and having a copy of it, we could choose who to share our data with, or we could choose to retain privacy of our data. We could also contribute our personal data to research projects or donate it in the public domain for the public good. So by creating practical tools that give people granular control over their personal data, that could lead to people becoming more data literate. And as they become more aware of the value of their personal data, that itself would result in the interactions between consumers and service providers becoming more equal, because now people would be able to evaluate whether or not they're getting enough value in return for sharing their data. Because, if data is our personal commodity, then we should be treating it as we would any other commodity and actually look at the value versus the cost or the associated risk of sharing our data. But finally, I just want to mention quickly the third thing that we want to consider, which would actually enable us to protect our privacy while also unleashing the potential of big data. And so the next thing we need to consider is data anonymization, because by anonymizing data, that means that no one's privacy would be threatened when the data is shared anonymously, and yet the benefits of sharing data and having data openly available would still remain. So in all, For a data economy, we want people and companies and organizations to be more confident about sharing more data and collaborate to create more value and create more useful applications from that data. And to foster the confidence needed, again, we need to establish a model of ownership of personal data to give people more control over their data, to give people more control over data that's generated by them. And we need to make data generally accessible to empower people to utilize data, not just use, to utilize data. And by us as a society learning how to interpret data in the open, it increases the confidence of the public about, how we arrive at certain results and how we arrive at conclusions from data. It also helps us as a collective to establish standards for storing and handling and accessing data. And all of that continues to put us in a better position to decide how data should be governed. It also helps us to develop a unified understanding of data and develop a harmonized view for better decision making so that we're able to invest in the right tools and the right infrastructure and even invest in the right partners to get more value out of data to ensure that however we decide to innovate going forward using data, that it truly adds value to our society. And the reason I believe that establishing a data economy in the Bahamas could be the greatest opportunity for us to truly bring forward the next data-driven revolution is because the Bahamas is actually in a unique position to readily allow for global sovereign data protection and data privacy. And I mentioned this in the first episode of this podcast, so if you haven't already, I highly advise you to listen to that episode. I don't want this particular episode to be a repeat of that. But basically, our Constitution, when interpreted from a digital standpoint, it could actually provide an environment for constitutional data privacy and for constitutional data protection and constitutional data sovereignty. And it would be great if we could extend that globally and position ourselves to become global custodians of data. Because the Bahamas, being a sovereign country, we can actually provide constitutional data protection, data privacy, and data sovereignty. And once people all over the world start to realize that we possess this unique data ecosystem that supports data rights at such a high level, they could actually seek digital citizenship in the Bahamas. And overall, this kind of data ecosystem could establish the foundation for data rights and data ownership where people can own their personal data. And that would definitely help to lay the groundwork for leading the way towards a real data economy. But that is it for this first look at a data economy for the Bahamas. I look forward to see how the Bahamas takes advantage of this unique opportunity to shape the global data economy that is revolutionizing all industries. And in the previous episode, I talked about the knowledge economy, and there I mentioned how the data economy, how it interrelates with the purpose of the knowledge economy and the ideal approach that we should consider when competing in a knowledge economy leveraging data. So I do recommend that you check that episode out if you haven't. But nonetheless, stay tuned for the next episode where I talk about the conceptual economy. And if you're interested in getting started in any of the economic models, whether it's the digital economy or the blue, green, orange, the knowledge economy, the data economy, the conceptual economy, or even the aquamarine economy that I proposed, which encompasses all of these economic models that I've previously mentioned. But if you're interested in getting started in any of them, do get in touch with our sponsor, $1 Business Solutions. You can get started with a free consultation. Just WhatsApp or call 825-9300. That's 825-9300. Or you can email innovate@$1businesssolutions.com. or visit sanddollarbusinesssolutions.com. And if you're new to my content, you can go to EdenMaryGator.com, where you can find the links to all of my social media. And you can choose there how you'd like to follow to stay updated for new episodes and participate in the conversation. But for now, don't forget to comment because I'm really interested to know your thoughts about this episode. And if you enjoyed it, please give it a like, or you can share the video. But until next time, I'm Eden Mary, and thanks for listening.